cannot overstate the importance and significance of photography in your website. If you are choosing between paying someone to do your photography and paying someone to do your website without photography or without really good photography, go with the photography. This is my anti-sales pitch to you. If you're choosing between hiring a web developer and hiring a photographer, hire a photographer and then do one of the free options that we'll talk about a little bit later, like Squarespace. Because it is the photography that A, forms an emotional connection with your potential client, and B, establishes legitimacy. So I did, as Steve introduced earlier, I used to work for PayPal. I did sort of the startup thing, and the last startup that I was at was acquired by PayPal. So I found myself leading a team of folks at PayPal. That is no longer what I do. I have since left PayPal a couple years back, and I founded an organization called Resilient Coders. I don't know if anyone has ever heard of Resilient Coders. Okay, we've got some head nods, cool. So Resilient Coders, we work with young people from communities traditionally underrepresented in technology, and we teach them these skills. We teach them web development and web design, and then we actually run our own web development company that employs those students, those alumni, to build websites for paying clients. We believe we believe deeply in economic empowerment, and so for us, being able to teach a very sought-after skill to our young people just gives them an avenue to economic freedom through web development. So that's why I'm here. I obviously believe very deeply in knowledge sharing. I want people to know about what this stuff is. I want folks to feel comfortable with this stuff. And that is what I am doing here. And that's what I am about. So that's more than enough about me. All right, so I want to jump right in with how to do this on the cheap. So something that I think is critical to know is what the actual point of your website is. And you have to have an understanding of who the target audience is of the website. There are a lot of nonprofits and businesses out there who they want to they're approaching the website from the perspective of what they want to say. But better than coming at your website with what you want to say is identifying what it is that people want to hear. And to best identify what it is that people want to hear, you want to know who that person is that you're trying to reach. So the first thing that we always go through, and by the way, this is sort of like it's a slightly more expounded version of what we do with potential clients at the lab, is we want to make sure that they know who they're targeting, because otherwise we're going to end up creating a product that chases an ever-evolving audience, if that makes any sense. So I'm going to butcher one of my favorite TED Talks out there, and you should absolutely look up The Real Thing. There's a fantastic TED Talk out there by this guy, Simon Sinek, and it's called Start With Why. And his whole mission is, I'm seeing some head bobs over there. So some people have seen it? Cool. So excuse the abridged version here, but basically what he says is that if anytime that you're building any sort of a product or a company or a concept that you want to get out there, you want to start with why. Why do you do what you do? And then from there extend beyond to the what, and then how is it that you actually do it. So the example that Simon Sinek gives in his talk is Apple. So if I were to say, what is Apple? People would say, well, it's a computer company. Sure, it's a computer company, but they also sell music. And sure, they make computers, but they also make phones. They do a bunch of different stuff, but we all have a general sense of what Apple is. And I'll tell you, the next time that Apple puts a product out, I am probably going to buy it, right? Even though I might not necessarily be in the market for whatever it is that they're selling, I got to tell you, I'm probably going to buy it. Because I'm bought into the why. What they're doing matters less, right? So the why is the ethos of Apple. What is, it's a phone, it's a computer, it's music. And then how, I don't care. Like how much RAM my computer has, like how much memory my computer has, I care much less about that. An ad that focuses on how much RAM my machine has is not going to sell. I don't know if you guys remember, there used to be these commercials that Android put out, where they're talking about the specs, right, of the machine. Well, this phone can do this, and it can do that, and it can do like a list of stuff. And at about the same time, Apple put out the series of ads that was, I'm a PC, I'm Apple, or I'm a Mac, right? So many more people in this room just went, oh yeah. Because that's the why, right? The reason you buy the Mac is because the guy just looked cool, and he was staying next to the guy who looked not very cool. Apologies to John Hopkins. Meanwhile, Droid is over here being like, oh, we do all the things. Our phone is better. We have so much stuff you can do with it. No one cared. So I say start with why, and this applies directly to your websites because whenever we work with clients, we always try to minimize the amount of content that they have and make sure that content is much, much, much more valuable. By the way, if anybody is wondering what this has anything to do with the actual dollar amount and cost of your website, and that's fair, it's because I am telling you as a provider of this service that when I look at how much money we're ultimately charging a client, it's driven up by the fact that we're like, oh, but what if we might do this other thing? And we might actually go back to this page over here. We're going to add another page that has a picture of my dog. And then we got to have this page over here that talks about nothing. Don't do that. This is me trying to prevent you from doing that. So for nonprofits anyways, and I think this probably applies to a lot of businesses, this is how I have sort of co-opted Simon Sinek's talk. The why is the problem statement. The what is the mission statement, and the how is the actual programming that you're running to do whatever it is that you want to do. So your problem statement, whether you're a business or a nonprofit or wherever you are, is probably never going to change. And that should be central to your web product, your website, your web application, whatever you build, because that will not change. That is who you are. Your mission statement might tweak, might change a little bit, right? So today we're resilient coders because coding is big. Maybe in another 5 years it's going to be systems automation or something like that, in which case that might shift a little bit. But the programming is always going to change, hopefully. Hopefully you're always iterating on whatever it is that you do, and you're going to want that to be something that is easy to change on your website. I'm gonna keep cruising along here, though. I want to hit this point here, which is the hardest sentence to finish. This seems pretty easy, but a lot of times when I work with either with clients or with jobs that I've been a part of in the past, this is your why. This is how you determine who you are. And this should really be central to the messaging on your website. I'll say that our company is an organization that teaches core web development skills to youth from underrepresented communities by way of a series of 2 programs that we run. And so that sentence kind of drags you out from the middle, from the why, out to the what and to the how. Being able to do this with your business is going to help you understand what is core to your website, what needs to be there, and what can be sort of shifted around, and what can go. We actually experienced a shift like this very recently because we used to call ourselves an educational program. In fact, I think I might have just done that a second ago. We're still in the process of making the shift. But we're starting to position ourselves out there more as a web development company that has a unique way of attracting and retaining its talent. Now, it's the same thing. We're doing the same thing, but that shift in messaging has made a huge effect on our website. We actually totally redid our website because we changed that sort of core level messaging. Another huge thing is founder bias, voice and tone. I encourage people to visit voiceandtone.com. This is something that a lot of folks run businesses, or a lot of folks bring a little bit too much of themselves into their websites, which is cool if you are your target audience. But I would urge folks to remove themselves from from their own target audience, if that makes any sense. An example that I give is that a few years ago, I was hired to build the branding and the initial website for a lingerie boutique, which I failed at completely the first time I went at it because I was thinking from my own perspective and I was designing for myself. And something that's really hard, I think, often for business owners to do is to remove themselves from the target demographic. Sometimes people do an audit and people talk to folks who are their target demographic to get a sense for what it is that people want to see. I'm going to cruise through this stuff here. Content, architecture, and flow is important. Messaging creep. A lot of folks who might be an artist, might go sort of too far down the rabbit hole of like, and here's my watercolors that I did, and by the way, here are the watercolors that I used. And we also do, you want to sort of keep your messaging concise and focused around what it is that is going to actually sell your product. So a content audit is super important. You basically just want to keep your messaging concise. So the flow, the mad flow, this is a hip hop artist that you may or may not be familiar with, but basically the flow of your website is hugely critical. This is the thing that I was talking about earlier when I said that you don't want people to do more than one thing on your page. You want to have an understanding for what your target audience is doing and guide them through that process. So we try to find a way to identify whether a person is going to be either a mentor or a donor or a potential client and shuttle them off in different pathways and only expect them to do the one thing. This is my call to action, line. You don't want one person to do two different things because it's a big mistake that nonprofits make. I think it's also a big mistake that a lot of businesses make. A lot of folks do a lot of stuff, and so they put a lot of stuff out there. They put a lot of stuff on the shelf. I would encourage you to really just minimize that as much as you can because you want to guide people down a particular path. Photography. I cannot overstate the importance and significance of photography in your website. If you are choosing between paying someone to do your photography and paying someone to do your website without photography or without really good photography, go with the photography. This is my anti-sales pitch to you. If you're choosing between hiring a web developer and hiring a photographer, hire a photographer and then do one of the free options that we'll talk about a little bit later, like Squarespace. Because it is the photography that A, forms an emotional connection with your potential client, and B, establishes legitimacy. So we've all gone to those websites where the photography looks like it was shot with someone's phone, and the first thing you think is, oh, it's that kind of business. Right? I'm seeing some head bobs. But if you have really slick photography, it helps you punch above your weight class. All right, so now here's where we get into some of my favorite stuff. There's a term that's thrown out in the tech community called the MVP. That's the minimum viable product, and that is the least amount of effort you can put into something to get the maximum amount of learning. The reason I bring this up is that there are way too many entrepreneurs out there, small business owners, that think that they need more than they need. Again, this is my anti-pitch. There are a lot of you in this room who probably think that you need to hire a web developer because you have a super custom website that you want done. The fact of the matter is that you probably want to start with one of the free options because you want to test out some assumptions that you're making. It happens all too often that folks invest several thousands of dollars and really, by the time that they get to key learning, and the key learning makes them, the key learning is such that they have to redo their website. I think that what you want to do if you're considering building a website is determine what is the laziest, what is the least amount of effort and money and time that you can put in to get the most bang for your buck right away. Most famous example of an MVP that I can think of is Dropbox. I don't know if people are familiar with Dropbox at all. Do people know their MVP story? So what they did is that they actually produced like a one-page static website that hosted a video of what they wanted to build, of what their vision for Dropbox was. And underneath that, they said, if this is interesting to you, sign up. So they were able to turn around to investors and say, well, we got 1 million signups, so maybe invest in us, and then we'll take that money and build out a piece of software. So if what you're doing, if what you want to do is, for example, if you want to sell art and you want to create a website that sells your art, I think one of the first assumptions that you're making is could it be that your particular clientele doesn't like buying art online? And this is me making assumptions I have no idea. But for the sake of argument now, you might not necessarily know for sure that they're going to buy products online, maybe they prefer having that personal connection to you or seeing it in person in a gallery setting. And so I would invest the smallest amount of time, the smallest amount of money that you can to validate that assumption. Again, my anti-pitch. So it was suggested that I add a checklist of what you should have access to before you go forth and hire someone to build your website, if that's what you want to do. When we have a new client, we always make the suggestion that by the time that we speak, the client will have done sort of a competitor analysis. That does a lot of stuff that helps us understand how they're thinking about their website. It also helps us sort of validate some assumptions and get a sense for what their expectations are. You're going to want to be able to speak to your target audience because there is a tendency to just put everything in your website. Here's why it was founded, and again, here's a picture of my cat. You probably don't need all that stuff. You're going to want to know how often you'll be updating and editing your content, because if you're just setting it once and forgetting it, you probably don't need a framework that allows you to edit your content regularly. You probably don't need something like Drupal or WordPress if what you really need is a static website that you will never change. And you're saving yourself tons of money there. And a sense for functionality. So if you want to do something beyond just displaying content, that's something that you're going to want to have a very specific sense for what that is before you engage with your developer. All right, so here's where we get into some of the stuff that you guys mentioned up here. Do not pay for it until you need to. That is something, again, my anti-pitch. Too many people say, all right, I'm going to create this piece of software. It's going to be the next Facebook, and I'm just going to spend $75,000 to build a prototype. Don't do that. There are a lot of free options. I don't actually like to give more than one free option because I think Squarespace it's not necessarily free. It's $20 a month, and I think that's your best bet for something where you're creating an MVP. So WordPress is totally free. There are two different flavors of WordPress. There's WordPress.com and there is WordPress.org. So WordPress.com is the one that's totally free. You can sign up for a WordPress account, and you would be like, I'm David, so it'd be like david.wordpress.com or resilientcoders.wordpress.com or something like that. All of that content would live on WordPress's hosting. By the way, I don't know if people are familiar with the terms hosting and domains, but just to run through real quick what that means, hosting is where your website lives. It's like rent. It's literally rent for your website files. But if you just do hosting, then your website lives at like 192.0.1.1.32, right? No one is going to remember that. Unlike paying rent on your apartment or your house or whatever, you also need to pay for the address so that you can tell your friends where to go. That's the domain. So we are buying hosting for resilientcoders.org to host our files, and then we also buy a domain, resilientcoders.org, so that will direct to the appropriate website. If you're using e-commerce, if your business is directly taking sensitive information, whether it's credit card or address, you should use another third-party service. Yes. So, all right, so there's hosting and then there's domains. So you're going to find that when you're building a site, especially if you're building it from scratch, there are a lot of different pieces that you have to tie together. So if you're building from scratch, that's when you're going to want to worry about things like PayPal and Venmo and all these different services that you can incorporate into your website. The most likely thing is that you are going to start by offloading all of that right out of the gate. So you're probably going to start by doing something like WordPress or Squarespace. And I know that at least WordPress has a very robust community of folks who build plugins. And so you can just use a WordPress plugin that somebody has built that already leverages that third party. So, like, if you're using WordPress, you might use like there are a bunch of WordPress plugins that you can use for e-commerce, and somebody else has built that plugin because of the fact that it's open source. People can download the code and just create their own plugins. And someone has created a plugin that ties into companies like PayPal and companies like Venmo or Braintree or whatever, and can handle all of that payment over there so that you are not liable for it. Yeah, I'm gonna bring this out because we're gonna start probably addressing some of these things. So security. Security is something that you need to be comfortable with the fact that if people want to hack your site, they will hack your site. Done. There are some sites that are more hackable than others. So when you use something like WordPress, because of the fact that it's so popular and open source, anyone who wants to hack can literally download the source code, see how it works, and hack away. WordPress is easy to hack for that reason. There are different levels of security that you can put in place. I imagine that there's probably like I'm sure WordPress has like security plugins. But the fact of the matter is that you can still be hacked, and you should plan accordingly. That's why I'm saying that if you're handling sensitive information, you want that to be offloaded somewhere else. So for example, if you are saving addresses, names, phone numbers, anything like that, Google Forms or something like it. If you're handling payments, PayPal, Venmo, Braintree, whatever it is that you want to use. So count on being hacked. Yeah, we're a little bit unique because we're a nonprofit, so we charge very little. We charge $80 an hour. And I know that to a lot of folks that doesn't seem like very little. Hear me out. We charge $80 an hour, and because that money for us goes, we have sort of a system where we pay these young people who are brand new to coding, and we also pay out of that money time for an instructor to make sure that everything is being done well to professional standards and being done on time. But because of the fact that the person doing the work is new to the field, we're able to afford a discount to clients. Most web designers and developers that you want to work with are going to charge you, hear me out, between $100 and $150 an hour.
So would you say that's the median then?
I think I was out that day at math class, so I don't remember which one is which, but it's like pretty well expected, the average, yeah. The fact of the matter is that if you're going with your friend's nephew, who is going to do it for you at $30 an hour, you're going to do it twice. So SEO, for folks wondering what SEO is, that's search engine optimization. So essentially, how Googleable is your website? It used to be that it was hard to make sure that you were sort of Googleable, and there's a very complex algorithm that no one really knows 100% for sure. Right, exactly. But the fact of the matter is that as long as you're using a service like any of the services that we've mentioned are already coded in such a way that it's ideal for SEO. Now, the part of SEO that is yours to make better or mess up for that matter is your content. You want to make sure that the content that you have on your website matches the keywords that somebody might search for. This was a struggle for me when I was working and wanted to be super like cute with my copy and be like, yeah, we're the greatest company that does all this awesome stuff. But people are like, Web Design Boston. Just use those words because that's how you come up in a search. I am an advocate for having a website that does one thing. Here's what I mean by that. When I was freelancing as a designer and developer and artist, I at one point had a website that had, a portfolio of my work as a designer, spoke to my coding ability and some of my art on the same website. And people are like, who is this? What are you? And while it was cool for me to show off, it wasn't particularly conducive to business. And the reason I say that is because folks, we are naturally drawn towards specialization. And so if I go to your website because I'm looking for an event planner and I see someone who is an event planner and artist hybrid, and I'm looking at somebody else, Sam is just an event planner, all he does is event planning, he wakes up in the morning and eats event planning for breakfast, then I'm going to have a propensity, maybe an erroneous one, but still a propensity to go with a guy who exhibits a specialization. And so my advice, take it or leave it, would be if you want to operate If you want to be two different things and operate two different entities, my suggestion to you would be to have two different websites because you will look more legitimate.